It's now 6 o'clock. I'll call the meeting to order. We'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mary Kay, if you do the roll call, please.
Dr. Dave Bardo,
Present.
Jill Meg Nelson,
Here.
Dr. Noel Deep, Danny Pyatt,
Here.
Tim Brunty,
Here.
Dr. Julie Sprague.
Here.
Unless our one guest wants to make a public comment, I see none. Okay, we'll go to new business, the budget update. Tim.
So, again, because September ended, we don't have interest in this report. And we go ahead and take a look at it. On the revenue side of things, things are trending very, very typical. What I'm a little bit concerned going forward is, we're looking at ESSER dollars. And if you look at our expenditures are ahead of last year. And we get into October, November, and those are pretty lean aid payment months. So we'll have to be very careful. So when I look at the year-to-date column, and we look at, you can see our salaries are trending higher, our benefits are slightly higher. But the big item would have been the textbook purchase that Ames made. And we have other purchase services that go along with ESSER. And so we're spending at a rate which is appropriate for the grant. I just hope the reimbursement cycle with DPI, we can only make quarterly claims with DPI. They want us to do it by the quarter. We have to have an approved budget. So when before we can make a claim, that budget has to be approved. And then we can't amend it until after we get the reimbursement. So as we have all these new hires, we've had to load them into the budget, get them approved. And if we have people on the grant who are working through a non-traditional license format that we've hired, we can't put them in the grant until they actually get their license number. So we're making all of these payments to folks, and we're not able to claim that aid. So we'll have to keep a pretty tight eye on it. Purchase service stuff we'll get, and textbooks, that kind of stuff, we'll get a turnaround in about 3 to 4 weeks typically. I don't know if that's going to lag behind as we get further into the year, but we'll just have to really keep an eye on our cash flow in the next 2 months. November in particular, there aren't any aid payments coming in, and we don't get any tax levies in, so we'll have to just watch it going forward.
Okay. Business B, enrollment projections and third Friday report.
Okay. So I asked Mary Kay, I had one mathematical error. I thought I had a formula calculating, and it didn't pick up the change. So this is the revised official third Friday enrollment count that we're using. And I made a note that the numbers between distribution doesn't add the residency, because as of last Friday, Mary Kay, maybe you can explain how OPAL works and how we've got kids that we're counting for, but we don't know where they're coming from.
There's 4 students that we're waiting to have their applications put through OPAL. So they're seated they're actually attending here, but we still don't have them counted for open enrolled in. So that's why there's a discrepancy
Between the 51 and the 47 that I'm showing on that sheet. And then you can see on towards the bottom the implications towards the budget. So this report is slightly more favorable than from an economic standpoint, from a financial standpoint, that we showed in the previous board meeting. We have lost a couple of open enrolled out students that, and Mary Kay, you can clarify, but they are actually, we were counting them, and we're not able to count them because of various reasons, whether they're going to Homer or
Right, right. And we did get some after after third Friday too, that are not, that won't be counted in the January count. So something with that.
So this is our official report to EPI. And from my standpoint, why it's important is I can now take this enrollment and I can plug it into the revenue limit formula. So I've got one additional piece of information. Then without getting too far afield, today is the first day in October, business day, so I also know the equalized values. So that's the second piece of information we can plug into the revenue limit formula. And now all we're waiting for is two things: the enrollment for the parental choice program, and then equalization aids, what we're going to get for general aids for the state. I'll have it figured out.
They'll let us know that by the 15th.
15th, yep.
So once you, I know we'll have a meeting on, what is it,
26.
26th. So can you send the committee, as soon as you have it,
Yep.
just,
So from now
Send
till
it.
then, I got to get my ducks in a row because we got a budget hearing on that same night.
I know, on the 26th.
And so
And we're,
24th.
The 24th.
okay, 24.
Monday, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, 21 days from the 3rd. Okay,
So we've got to
24.
get official notice out and get the budget book finalized and everything, so, yeah, you'll know.
I know. Okay.
Then, if you open the second sheet there, Dr. Bardo asked me to give just a little budget projection. So I want to explain the color coding.
You're talking the sheet now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
So that is our current enrollment by grade level that we reported to DPI. And then what I've done is, it's kind of by hook or by crook on how you get the numbers in the yellow. I'm using just an average 4K class of 115 students, and we generally pick up 10 to 20 kids going into kindergarten. And I'm projecting that going forward. Then I haven't gotten current enrollment data. The numbers in the blue are numbers that I took from last second Friday count in January from Peace and All Saints. And I added those grade levels into this number. So, this is very quick, down and dirty,
Yep.
and then I'm projecting them forward. But you can see how we're doing then over time. And what's happening at those two schools, we're getting enrollments between 20 and 25 students per school. So it's somewhere between 40 and 50 kids per class we're going to pick up when they come to the high school. And that seems to be fairly constant. So I think, when you look at the high school class sizes, it's going to bounce around a little bit. But I think that 190 to 180 number is probably going to be pretty consistent. And when I look at the revenue limit formula and what I'm seeing for this year is we're dropping, but the reason we're dropping is 3 years ago, we had a drop of about 100 students. The last 2 years, it's been very, very consistent.
3-year rolling average.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that what you're looking for?
This?
Yep.
Yeah. The only thing, and obviously you don't have any idea what it's going to be, but we're also going to lose, starting probably next year, some students down to Mattoon. So we have to,
Yeah.
looking forward, we're going to have to, the new guy or lady is going to have to
Yes.
pay attention to that as we go forward,
Correct.
which will decrease our numbers down in the lower grades.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Good information as always. We are to new business C, biennial budget discussion, equity and funding. Andy Mary, who was present, made a point of thanking President Danny Pyatt at the last meeting for putting his name to a thing in the paper that was about equity and funding. and how some schools win and many schools lose. So first of all, Tim, I have a couple questions for you. And do you want to explain about, for example, when we take our money from the state for funding of our school district, we get about $10,000 per child, which is at the bottom, it's the minimum number, correct?
Correct.
So that it's on tape, kind of explain, I know the formula is the formula, but why are we a loser when other schools around us are winners?
So the formula was set up went into effect in 1994. And it's called the base revenue per member. So essentially, they looked back, legislature looked back at what districts were spending per student in 1992. And they then instituted that as a revenue limit formula. And there's typically, so you get this base revenue per pupil. And the state said, oh, and by the way, the base should be, and they call that the low revenue limit ceiling. And Antigo is at the low revenue limit ceiling. And the low revenue limit ceiling is at 10,000. And there's typically an inflationary measure built into the budget, which would allow that revenue per student to increase. And if, for example, someone was spending more than Antigo back in 1992, they have received more money since that date under the revenue limit formula going forward. And typically the way it works is the legislature does build inflation into the formula. And in Governor Evers' proposal this year, they're talking about doing the same. What they aren't doing is sometimes there's an adjustment to the low revenue limit ceiling. So we can get an adjustment sometimes bigger or smaller than what the general inflation rate would be. So as an example, back when Scott Walker came in, there was a reduction in the amount per pupil. But typically there is some inflationary measure. And it's usually based on, the legislature look at the surplus or whatever they have the revenue coming in. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. But again, it's based on what district spent in 1992, and if you were high spending in 1992, you're the winner.
Yeah, and because there's an inflationary component, because you spend more, you get more.
You get more.
So we're always on the wrong side of it.
The disadvantage is if you go out to referendum now and you fail the referendum, you don't get, if there's an increase in the, let's say if Antigo's at low revenue limit ceiling, and we fail the referendum, we go out for an operating referendum, we wouldn't automatically get that increase, that inflationary increase if there is one. So, there is a slight risk to be asking your public, and that's really what the low revenue base is set up for, where if you have difficulties passing it or your community doesn't agree with it, you have the base. But that doesn't necessarily mean the board has to go to base. There are some districts they might be negatively aided, and they choose not to, let's say, tax to the max is what it's called.
Okay. What's the current, on special education, the current percentage that they hand out to districts?
I haven't seen the calculation for this year. It's typically, it's some certain pot of money. So the legislature appropriates millions of dollars for special education categorical aid. And it gets divvied up by eligible expenses of all the districts from the previous year. And it's been running between 28% and 30% of late.
So is that 28%, for example, per child in your district, or is it 28% spread around?
So it really is looking at the amount of money, the general fund that we spend on special education. So in special education, we have, and you're going to learn about IDEA grants tonight. So we have federal support, we have Medicaid support, we have categorical aid that we get from the state, and then we have general fund money that we transfer to Fund 27 Special Education. It's really looking at that shared cost piece, which we're funding just under $3 million from the general fund to special education, and we're getting funded on that. So 30% is, you know, you can see we're getting $1 million in categorical aid, health support, special education.
And finally, our busing supplement, how does that work?
So again, that's an appropriation, and they look at ridership. And so the state looks at how far your students live away from school. And they have different rates of pay. So it starts out with, if you're between 2 and 5 miles, you get $35 per student for the whole year. And you only are required to record if students rode at least one day a year. And then the scale goes up from there to over 12 miles, and if you're over 12 miles, you get $375 per student. In an Antigo's case, our aid is roughly 10% of our, slightly more than 10% of our transportation costs. Last year, we got $133,000 in state aid, categorical aid for transportation. We used to get high-cost aid prior to consolidation, but we became much more efficient with our transportation. And it's a good thing we no longer qualify for high-cost transportation aid.
Well, I'm going to throw out some ideas, Tim. I know that the equity in funding has been around for probably since about '93, which was right after this went into effect. And anytime you try to make changes, you always have winners and losers. And unfortunately, if we try to help our district and districts in the north, I always said, if you're south of Highway 10, they get what they want because they have the majority of legislators in both the Senate and in the Assembly. But having said that, so where I'm coming from is that if the Department of Public Instruction really wants to be equitable, they should take their pot of money and distribute it evenly between each child throughout the state. So I'm throwing that out as an idea. So example, if they have their big pot of money, Tim, I know you're counting a little bit, that's okay. And then we have our 1,200 students. There's a total number of students for this pot of money, and we're one of the losers. And if the pot of money, and they add up all the students in the entire state from the third Friday and distribute the money equitably, and by that I mean evenly, that's a certain amount per child, that would be advantageous for us, and it would be equitable.
So, Dave, my comments are kind of related, but we get, the revenue limit is one formula, the aid formula is another, and people often get the two intermingled and confused, and I'm not suggesting you are. Antigo is a huge, huge winner in the aid formula. So if Dr. Bardo is suggesting everybody, let's just say the average number, if we took every student and we looked at it, instead of being at $10,000 per student, it was $12,500 across the state, just hypothetical. We would be, I mean, that would be a great boon to us. But if we mess with the aid formula, when you look at what Antigo receives in aid versus what someone like Elko would receive, or a revenue or a property-rich district receives, they're the big losers. So it depends on what aspect of the formula you're talking about. And as an example, right now, if we use that 12,500 as a number, we're receiving about 68% aid on that number. Where you look at someone like Elko, they're way below 25%, or they're way below that. But they have a tax base that's much bigger than ours per student. So as long as people know what they're getting when they're suggesting that, they have to understand that.
Okay, throw another one at you. So, what if busing was based on the number of miles traveled per day within a school district in their busing? In other words, not the thing you talked about with 200, or what was it?
Plus miles.
$35 for the closed kids and $375 for the long. But again, I'm looking at the state as a whole, and we know there are many districts that hardly have any busing,
Yeah.
and we have tons of busing.
I think.
Because there's a pot of money there that could be evenly distributed by the number of miles your busing system drove on the third Friday count.
So I'm not sure if you're asking my opinion of it, or if you're just a general discussion.
Well, I'm going to call on Andy next, right after we're done right here, but he wants us to come up with some ideas that we as a board can put forward, whether it be to the state, to our assemblyman and our senator, or send it along with Andy to CISA 9, and see if we can get CISA 9 to say, yes, this is the kind of changes we should make to the funding. So I'm just throwing out ideas,
Yep.
and then I'm going to call on Andy,
So,
because I know he has some.
I mean, there's no question, we spend, $1.25 million on transportation, and we get just over 10% aid. But we've become pretty darn efficient with how we do it. I mean, and it's probably from our parents' perspective and our students' perspective, double busing the district, there's really huge advantages of that too. But I like things under the revenue limit formula, and nobody can complain, man. If we got $12,500 per kid under the revenue limit formula, everybody's getting the same thing. That's a pretty good deal. We'll figure out transportation, because that's a much smaller pot of money than what we need per pupil.
So you like the first idea better?
I do, but
So do I.
I
But I was trying to look at the three pots
Yeah,
over the
I
weekend and come up with some ideas.
Yeah.
Because I knew Andy
What I
was
worry is
coming.
if we throw out too many, as a group, we can all get on the same page, and it's difficult because there are districts that just absolutely hate the only thing they're concerned about is the aid formula, because they're a winner in the revenue limit formula. So everybody's got a little different interest, and that makes it difficult. And if you own your own bus fleet, you have an aging bus fleet, man, you'd want to get aid in the transportation bucket. So, yeah.
Andy, would you like the floor?
Well, I would just comment on this
Well,
busing thing,
do you want to
I
come
think
down
one of
Yeah, why don't you come down, Andy? We'll set up a chair for you.
One of the things that bothers me is sparsity aid. That districts with 1,000 kids get additional busing, well, I think it's districts with 750 kids get money. They want to raise that to 1,000, but why wouldn't you just raise it and let everybody who
Qualifies.
Yeah. And then when you're talking about splitting all the money up in the state, right now, there's a lot of districts that, as Tim said, don't really get any state aid like we do. And so if you're going to include them and split the money up, we're going to end up with less, which is, I think, what Tim said. So.
The other thing, I take a little broader approach. I think the revenue limit formula, it's frustrating that we're at 10,000, but one of the things that Anna's got going for it is the AGR program. In the AGR program, we receive somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500 additional for every student that is eligible K through third grade. And when we consolidate it to those three schools, we kind of there were schools that qualified. I don't know the exact percentage, but we've got a much higher percentage of children that qualified for EGR funding than we had prior to consolidation. And when you think of that, I mean, you know, we're getting an additional almost $800,000 in aid just in one program, which other schools may not and most likely don't qualify for. So you got to kind of look at the whole thing, and that's what makes it so complicated. There are so many different buckets.
So Andy, I'm assuming that you were coming at this from being our season 9 representative? No. Okay, then you're,
No, I mean,
Okay.
here at season 9, you know, at this month's meeting, we're going to discuss some of these things, but the reason we're discussing them is exactly what Tim said. Everybody's a little bit different. And so we just want to talk about it and try to understand what's different in your district that's different in my district.
Well, you know, Andy, I think I really like the categorical aid for special education, because everybody's got special ed.
Yeah.
And, you know, that $2.8 million that's additional cost, that's coming out of the general fund. So it's supporting special education via taken away from everybody else, and you don't like to look at it that way. But if we had that categorical aid raised, it would help all kids. And it would help all kids across the whole state.
Yeah. So what, you're in Antigo, I think it's 1,565, maybe 1,565 that comes from every kid who's not a special ed
Correct.
student to pay for special ed. So if you're looking at that $10,000 and you subtract the 1,500 off, we really have about $8,500 per kid, which is a couple $100 less than voucher schools get. And additionally, voucher schools are getting 100% on their special ed kids, which they're getting from us, until they get up to 19,000 and something, and then they're getting 90%. So, you know, that's why I think, oh, why don't we all just get 90%? And that's in the DPI proposal here, is to go to 45 in the first year and 60 in the second year, with the intention of someday going to 90. But, you know, I think that's going to be one of the big things in the budget is, I got to think that, you know, if we're going to raise, they're going to raise the amount that goes to voucher schools. And that affects us because we have 2 voucher schools next year. And so, you know, if they raise that more than they raise us, we're going to be going backwards again.
right.
Sorry, I just came to listen to Dave, but can't resist putting my 2 cents.
Well, I told you I'd let you talk, you
Yeah.
remember?
Thank you for doing that.
So, anything else on this subject before we move on?
John Humphreys reached out to me and wanted to come to a finance committee meeting, so maybe we ought to have him come and share his thoughts of what Governor Tony Evers and Jill Underlay is going to present. And you touched on some of that just now in the budget. So maybe next month we should have John on the agenda. And he's here on Mondays in the district, correct?
I don't have a schedule memorized, actually, but I'm sure if he talked to you about it.
Yeah.
I would rather see him at a regular meeting, as opposed to just talking to 3 board members.
Right.
Talk to all of them.
We can see what's on the agenda for the regular meeting this month, and maybe potentially, if he can be here.
And is John advocating for just raising categorical, or is he looking at both?
Well, his big thing is raising the revenue line,
Okay.
but also special ed funding, and I don't think they change. I don't think AEF changes much in what they're lobbying for, because it doesn't change.
I will check with him, Denny.
Well, they really haven't changed it much since '93. It's, meaning, at the state level, they've made some different increases along the way, but as far as the structure of the program, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, if you look at what other districts, what their revenue limits are, they're unbelievable. You know, they're almost double what ours are. So, they're already at that. Because who's North Lakeland, 19,000. So,
That's their K-8, right?
I guess, but yeah, Marathon is 11,700. What's Wausau? 10,625. So there's some real outliers there, but, you know, almost everybody, Elko 610, 10,610. Athens, 1,684. So there's 6 districts in CESA that are at the 10,000 level. So we're not alone there. But yeah. If it would go up $1,000, then you would include another 9 districts, I think it is. But that's not what, you know, when you read DPI's thing, it kind of says that they want to raise the revenue limit up to 11,000, but they also want to raise everybody up to, by $1,000. So
Doesn't change.
Doesn't change the scale.
it doesn't change the scale. And if you think about our budget, $10,000 is what, about 7 or 8%? I mean, $1,000.
Yeah.
$1,000 would be 7 or 8%. Well, we already spent 5 of those this past year raising salaries, and can't see that we're not going to spend another 5 or 8% next year, just because that's what CPI. And we're going to quit spending ESSER money here sometime. And do we kind of have a cliff coming there, Jim? When we get rid of ESSER money?
And for a lot of positions.
Yeah. I just went back and in the budget book, I include a little section on, we call them handicap aids. And I don't have any information back. I mean, we've logged it since 2000, and it was running almost 36% back in 2000. And it's ebbed and flowed since that from, 25 to 30% over the last 22 years. So it hasn't changed much.
Every time, sorry.
Well, anything else on this topic? Okay. New business D, budget mileage costs for Boys and Girls Club of the Northwoods After School Program.
So Dave, I just put in any administrative content there in Kate, I should say. And that's just what I've got budgeted out of ESSER. And it's kind of based on what we did last year. I'll probably have to have conversations with Faith about how quickly that's going. And then to be truthful, I haven't monitored September's utilization yet to know. I think those numbers are realistic, but I'll take a look at that before we finalize the budget. But it's kind of based on a little bit historical that we have.
Transportation to from Neboken, is that summer school? Sorry, remind me, I feel like we talked about this.
It's
But
just,
can you clarify that?
we've
Is
got,
that-
we're allowing.
You put it,
Last year's goal was to get each class, kindergarten through 5th grade, to the school forest at least twice. And Faith monitors that with the classrooms, and will cover the cost of 2 field trips there and back. So that's
So-
what that is.
Separate from the club.
Correct. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
Do you see a number?
Yep. After school transportation.
Yeah, mine doesn't show it, so, yeah, probably not. I was, but
What's our time frame to use ESER 2 again?
We have all of next school year, I'm sorry, ESER two.
yeah.
I'll save this year and next year for
ESER three.
3.
Yeah.
So funding is ESER 2 now, and are we using funding from ESER 3?
We are. So
Okay.
we're gonna, we have positions that are coming out in this fiscal year, and then other new positions like STEAM teacher, additional social worker, some other positions are coming out of ESER 3. And Julie's correct on the performance period. We have to have it through September 30th of next year,
ESER 2.
ESER 2, and then the following year for ESER 3.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any comments or further questions on budget for after-school program and Neboken travel? Okay, we'll go to new business E, title and ID federal funds explanation.
Okay, so this one I'm probably going to tap in with Julie, because I'm sure she certainly has more of the institutional knowledge of the purpose of the grants. But, so I included a little synopsis, and that just copied and pasted off of GPI. When I think of Title I, I think of math and reading. So the goal is really to remediate for ELA and mathematics. And from business office perspective, again, this is a federal grant. We have, we are any year, we borderline on requiring for a single audit. So the guidance set forth by the Department of Education in these programs is rigorous, and we can't supplant. So this is a program that would get tagged on a minimum of every 3 years of getting an audit, but anytime we expend, if we have carryover 1 year and then exceed $750,000, there's a mandatory audit. So this program is one of them that's highly regulated, and it's a program where we expend the funds. First we submit a budget, then we expend the funds, and then we claim. So the carryover that you see is not included in fund balance because it's money we have not received. It's an allocation we haven't used. And there's, like I said, there's a lot of rules you need to follow. And one of them is called tiding. So we have, from when we get the allocation until we make the final claim, there's 27 months that can occur, maximum amount. And if we don't spend it in that time period, we would lose it. And that's important when we get the funds like Title II, and we'll talk about that later. What's important when you look at the budget, you can see the overall allocation. It's a formulaic grant, so I don't know how the allocation is actually calculated, but I know it's based on free and reduced rates, but it's not, as far as I'm aware, it's not directly tied to Anagos free and reduced rate per se. I don't know how that's calculated. We get an allocation, and we're told that's it. And every school that qualifies gets it. The other thing we have to do is we have to do equitable participation within this grant. So each year, Amy has to meet with the principals over at the parochial schools and let them know their allocation. We have to let them know what their expenditures. We're the fiscal agent. So everything However they use that money has to come through the business office. And if they purchase stuff like computers, technically that stuff is ours. It's not theirs. So their PD, when they want to register for a conference or if they want to travel, that's all coming out of the district, and we do the arranging, we do the paying. It's just the way federal programs work. So you can see by school, the primary expenditure are our Title I classroom teachers that are getting coded there. And essentially what's happening is with this equitable participation, we're looking at the schools, we're looking at their free and reduced rate compared to the students that qualify for the district, and we're taking that allocation, dividing it up by total eligible students, and then distributing that money to each of the buildings appropriately. So then what Amy does is we look at why it varies so much is you might have a new title teacher who may be taking single insurance or no health insurance versus a more senior, someone taking a family. So she's assigned staff to each one of the buildings. That's typically their salary and benefit. And then when you get to the parochials, they typically don't qualify for a whole staff member. So she's parsing out her their schedule based on the allocation. So that brings up another thing that we have to do. We have to do something called time and effort reporting. So whenever you're charging a teacher to, let's say, Peace versus All Saints, and it's a portion of their day, we have to use a schedule and they sign off every month saying, yes, in fact, this is my schedule. And that's another thing that gets tested during the audit. So you can just see the breakdown there. And what we do this time of the year, Amy is still putting her supply budget together, and until we get an approved budget on the non-salary expenditures, we just lump that number into the district. And at some point, Amy will, either through professional development or through curriculum purchases for supply purchases for those classrooms, that'll get parsed out between our schools. The allocation to the parochials is all set at this point.
It's complicated.
Questions on title? And the whole thing, one of the compliance pieces is that the licensure. So these teachers have to be licensed, and if they aren't, and generally, like I said, when we're transferring new people in, they're in the process, but if they don't get a license issued by DPI at the end of the school year, we have to back those monies out and put them in the general fund.
Has that happened in the past?
Generally, it happens with some grants, like we'll talk about IDEA, where you just have people that are working towards it, and the backlog of DPI and such. There's a little bit of grace period, but they might not qualify until March or April, and if they don't get the license, yeah, we have to back it out.
Even if it's DPIs on their
Well,
end result of?
Generally, like this time of year when we're like with the ESSER grants, that would be a really great example. You've got students that are, teachers that are involved in a year-long program. And it'll be touch and go if we get a license by the end of April.
So some of the staff that we have allocated from the S2 funds potentially are going to come out of the general fund, correct?
Yeah, and then we'll do the unfortunate of backing all those payrolls out and charging them to someone else. So we get the balance, but yeah. There's no way we're gonna let all that money hit the general fund. It just won't happen. Moving on. So, when I think of Title II, just in the layman's terms, I think of PD and recruitment, so professional development and recruitment. And our allocation is for both of these grants, as our enrollment declines, our allocation is declining right along with it. So we generally have about $100,000 to spend on professional development. And again, if you look at that, you can see that we're doing equitable participation between the parochials and ourselves. And it's the same kind of formula. Generally, the carryover, particularly coming out of COVID, our parochials struggled to spend it because they weren't going anywhere. And that's what the major bulk of the carryover is. In the past, before we had ESSER, we would take our recruitment dollars. We weren't, the competition wasn't so steep so many years ago, but our recruitment typically came out of this fund. So if we made an offer, a couple $1,000 sign-on bonus, it would come out of Title II. Anything else? Title III is an area where it's interesting. So this is a grant that we don't receive more than $10,000, and by federal standard, we have to join a consortium. So we relinquish our funds to CISA 9. We're part of a consortium with CISA 9. And it's funds that we can then, as an example, we might have a couple Chinese students that need some tutoring, or they need some language services for something we're communicating home. We can apply for those expenses, and CISA 9 will reimburse us. But our Spanish-speaking population is increasing, and yet we really don't get funding to support that activity. And so from the general fund this year, we're probably going to spend $35,000 to $40,000 helping those kids out with English language learners. But that's essentially what Title III is for.
Just as a side note, you may remember we used to spend significant dollars to CISA, I want to say 2. Anyway, her name is Terry Massey-Archin, and she is kind of a statewide guru in EL. So we contracted with her for several years, probably my first 3 here, and the idea was for her to grow our capacity so that we could have our own programming, and that is essentially what's happened. Jessica Colby serves as our EL coordinator. She's also a counselor. She's just done a great job of learning from Terry and with Amy's guidance taking on that responsibility.
Okay, Title IV, again, it's another allocation that we get. And I'm going to say, for layman's term, I call it, it's used to provide a well-rounded education. And we can do things, how we use it, we can do things like, example, like the band program. We have, maybe there's a one-time purchase of a unique instrument, or we actually use it for band instrument repair. That's like sort of like the tip of the iceberg. But it can also be used to supplement Title I, so math and reading supports. Julie, can you think of any other? I think of, another example would be we weren't able to hire a certified music teacher this year. We're using these funds to supplement with software, music software that teacher is using to instruct the kids.
Well-rounded education, it even has that in the description. Is so broad, it kind of brings a chuckle, but it's not always that easy to have things fit under there, but we do our best because it is unique. Yes, supplement, not supplant current initiatives, so that's a key.
Okay, the next one is IDEA. And what's interesting is we throw around, from an educational perspective, we throw around IDEA. Sometimes we say flow through, sometimes we say school-wide set-aside. We're pretty loose with it because we all kind of know what grant we're talking about. But again, this is another allocation. And this is probably one of the highest regulated grant programs that we have. And the first measure is something called excess cost. So to keep us from supplanting and using this federal dollars in place of the general fund, we have to do excess cost calculations. And again, this one, depending on the year, is right on the edge of being audited. but it's audited every 3 years. So excess costs, they look at the average cost of delivering education by grade level group. And then they want to make sure that the funds that we're claiming are eligible and they're excess. And they do that by that calculation. So let's just say we look at the cost of educating someone at East Elementary School. Let's throw out a number, $8,500. And oh, by the way, we're going to spend a couple $1,000 doing X, Y, Z, providing an aid for a particular student. So that is excess to just general student costs. The other thing that's a requirement is we have to do something called maintenance of effort. So what MOE is essentially saying you cannot reduce local expenditures without, you have to maintain local expenditures to be eligible for the federal grant. And an example would be, let's just say we have we get reduced insurance, and we reduce our insurance by 15%. And we have aides that qualify for insurance. And so our expenses for those aides' health insurance down 15%. That's not an allowable reason to spend less money in special education. We have to maintain that expenditure. So between Heidi and I, we're looking at that. We do it every quarter, and then we start looking at it more closely as we get to year end. And the DPI is testing us to make sure we maintain our low cost. And if we don't qualify, there's 4 tests that we have to meet. And if we don't at least pass one of those tests, we're going to spend general fund money and giving it back to the federal government because we didn't maintain the cost, and that's the penalty. So we're always very careful, and an exception to the rule would be when someone retires, if we're able to hire a new teacher at a lower cost, we can claim that as an exception if it gets approved by DPI. And anytime someone leaves a position, we can look at, do we really need that position? Voluntary leaving is an exception. When we have a student graduate out, let's say they had a one-on-one aid, that can be an exception. So you need to apply for all those exceptions, and then DPI has to approve them. So this one is a very, very highly regulated program. One of the things that Heidi has done is she's done something within this is called school-wide set-aside. She wanted an additional guidance counselor, thought that was very important. So we have a guidance counselor coming out of title that can serve both special education and non-special education students as a guidance counselor when it falls under, and I don't know all the details, but it has to do with having school-wide Title I programs as well, where we can serve target students that need it and general students that are part of the building. So that's kind of unique to this program. And I included the last page there, I think, is talking about the second from the list. There, I just gave you, I mean, this program has so many requirements and so many regulations to follow. It essentially takes Heidi and her assistant and Angel Crane and myself and Laura Leiterman to stay on top of it. This was a difficult one. And then finally, we have the early childhood program. So this is a program for, I believe, 3 and 4-year-olds. And essentially, we use this to cover the cost of having a classroom aide for our early childhood program. And early childhood is open to any eligible student who qualifies within the district. And there, you know, as you've seen on the revenue form, they get counted too. And Heidi and I haven't talked because it looks like we've got more expenses than we've got grant. So we'll have a conversation here before we get together.
Yeah, I noticed I was grinning at the 23-24 expected carryover.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Once again, Tim, thank you so much for putting this together for us.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. With that, we've gone through the agenda.
Dave, if I could just.
But
make
I'll
one
let
final-
Tim talk some more.
Just one final thing. So as a, one of the balancing points is, we talk about excess costs and costs of special education. You have to balance, so if you, let's take that IA. If we have an IA and we run them in the general, we run them in special education, and we run them through the general fund portion of special ed, we get 30% aid on it. If we put them in the grant, you know, that's 100%, but we're taking money out of the grant. So there's kind of a sweet spot that I look at where, you know, you want to maintain effort, and I don't want to overcommit, because I can gain, certainly I can gain additional categorical aid, but then I got to maintain that cost for the future for as long as that employee either doesn't perform, and a termination is not an allowable reduction, it's not an exemption. So essentially, when you got to be really careful on balancing between putting people into the general Fund 27 categorical aid category versus the grant. So that's something Heidi and I do all the time. And I always tell Heidi, the grants, we have code, and the grants are coded to 341. And preschool is 347. And I tell her, Heidi, you can look at 341 and 347, but I'm going to manage 011, the general fund for special education. And so that's something we just go back and forth, and because you want to be able to, as we decline in enrollment, we got to bring that down, we got to get those exemptions, but yet we don't want to lose the grant funding. So there's that fine art between the two.
He's retired.
Can't think about it.
Okay, with that, need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? Mary Kay, you want to second it tonight?
Oh, I can do that too, right?
No, I asked Mary Kay too.
My turn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thank you,
And
Tim. It is 7:30, so we'll call the meeting to order. And stand for the pledge. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay.
Thank you. He's coming. Mary Kay, will you take roll call, please?
Jill McNelson,
Here.
Dave Bardo,
Here.
Jay Schrader, Amy Doms,
Here.
Dr. Julie Sprague,
Here?
I'm sorry, we'll show me.
He's,
Keith.
okay.
I don't know if it's.
I don't think it's locked. Is it locked? He can knock.
You can knock.
All right. Mary Kay, is there anybody signed up for public comment?
No.
Okay. So then we'll move on to new business. Item A, Start College Now presentation.
Attached, you will see the list of Start College Now students. It says 7. There are only 6 of them listed because one student took one of those courses in the summer. It was a CNA course, also through NTC.
I updated the list.
You did, but on the agenda note,
Oh,
it says 7.
Thank you.
Yep. So we described about Start College Now last time and how that we're, as a district, responsible for paying the tuition for these students, either juniors or seniors, who take an unlike course, and a course that's unlike anything that we offer here. So I guess, what questions do you have about the list? They're all through NTC. We didn't have any early college credit for this spring, which would be through the UW systems.
Do you guys have any questions? JD? No questions?
Okay.
Do we need to take this to the full board?
Yes, it needs to be approved. October 1st was the deadline to register for
Register.
classes
Okay.
this spring.
Thank you.
Wait, did Dave ask you a question about diversity studies?
Nope. Okay. So if that is all, we'll move on to letter B, beginning of the year data presentation.
Okay, so you have it uploaded, but also projecting it here.
Thank
We
you.
didn't know if that would be easier for people who might be here. So I will click through for everyone, so you don't have to worry about moving around. But I'm going to start off the presentation, and you'll notice that some of this will look familiar to those of you that have been on the board for a while. But we're here to share with you some of our fall data updates, and then just a brief overview of some of our state tests. In a few months, when the report card is released, we'll do a deeper dive into ACT and forward exam data. So here's a reminder of our continuous improvement goals, and we'll be focusing on our student achievement goal statement, and we're primarily going to focus on our benchmarking assessment, which is our fast bridge assessment. So just as a reminder, sorry about that, it was kind of loud up there. Just as a reminder that our student achievement goal at the district level for our continuous improvement plan feeds into our school plans, and they have student achievement goals as well. So some of the work that you'll see in the school level plans that they're talking about with their staff are in their school level continuous improvement plans. Then we also have in our district level continuous improvement plan have items around improving our achievement scores as related to our district plan. So here's an updated district demographic snapshot. This was not the certified third Friday enrollment count, which was just submitted last Friday. This was about a week before the certification, so this could change just slightly. This was from 9/16. So that was the actual date of third Friday. We have to then certify all of that, which was just turned in last Friday. So this was from 9/16. And this looks somewhat consistent with what we saw last spring. I think it's always just good to kind of reframe kind of where we're at in terms of our district demographics. And then here's also the breakdown of our different race and ethnicities in our school community, and you'll also see these updates when you get to our elementary level, where we combine all three elementaries. So just a reiteration of our school and district academic goal. So there is one change. We adjusted the year to 2025. It previously said 2024. And as I mentioned before, we'll look more deeply into forward exam ECT and ECT Aspire in a couple months, but we'll just do a quick overview now. Another note to ACT Aspire is changing their name this year. So in the future, you'll see what's called ACT, Pre-ACT Secure. So we'll keep referencing that, but that is a name change that's coming up this year.
Why are they doing that?
We don't know. Make it confusing, probably. I don't know. Okay, so here's some summary. The test results were just released from the embargo late last week on the 29th, so they kind of keep the data under wraps to the public until a certain amount of time within the school year. That release was just late last week. So forward exam, just a refresher, that is in grades 3 through 8 and then 10th grade. This is just a combined overall synopsis of those state test results at this point. So in ELA, we had consistent scoring in the previous year. In math, in general, we saw an increase of about 2% in proficiency. Science and social studies both had similar increases in proficiency. And we also had more students test last year. Our testing percentage was very good the year before in comparison to the state. We had around 7 to 8% of our students who did not test 2 years ago, whereas the state had around 14% that did not test. So we had a good testing percentage in relationship when students had the choice to return to school in any districts or not. In ACT and ACT Aspire, we have a consistent composite score for ACT, which is grade 11 only. In ACT Aspire, that's a grade 9 and 10 test combined, and we saw slight increases as well in those two assessments. So like I said, we'll dig in deeper to those once we have our state report cards released. But what I'm pleased to report is that in all of our areas we're seeing increases in stability in our scoring, which we had not seen in years previous. And also you'll see in our benchmark assessments that we have some similar trends to share with you. So just remember, these assessments are really a high-level assessment where the movement will be slower or less than you might see in some of the fast bridge assessments we'll share next. Oops, I'm clicking the wrong thing here. Let's go to the right one. All right. So this is a reminder. I'm not going to read this to you because those of you that are here from the board have been on the board before when you've seen this. But this is our benchmark assessment, and tonight we'll be sharing with you the comparison to national ones. So here we have district read proficiency. A reminder that we have two different assessments here, that's why we have two different bar graphs. K and 1 take a different assessment, they take an early reading assessment, and then grades 2 through 11 take an A reading assessment. That's why you see the discrepancy there. Also noting here, these are percentages. When you look at the future graphs of the schools, you'll see number of students and not percentages. So this is an overall district perspective. In the past, yeah.
Can you go back, please?
Sure.
At the bottom of the slide. Okay, when it, for example, when it, the red,
Yeah.
which is our high risk, it says 0 to 19.99 percentile. Does that mean that those students are getting less than 20% of the questions correct?
No,
What does that
means,
refer to?
okay, that's a percentage in comparison to students across the nation. So like if you were in the 10th percentile, students that are scoring the same as you, you are like at the 10th percentile, and then those below you would be under 10, or those above you would be in the 90th percentile. It's not how many questions they're getting correct.
Okay.
Because it's a normed test, so depending on the population, these numbers fluctuate with every testing window because it adjusts. Okay, so last year we started sharing with you longitudinal data by grade cohort. So this isn't about like 10th graders last year. We're not comparing 10th graders this year in this chart. This graph is showing students who are, last year they were 4th graders, now they're 5th graders moving into 6th grade. So it's showing trajectory for those students. You can see here in our longitudinal data for A reading, we are now in the fall here of 2022 trending upward with most of our graphs. That is happy to see. After our spring, we took a little bit of a dive for some of our assessments, but now we're seeing increase, and so that's pleasing to report that we didn't have as much of a summer slide as maybe we have had some other times. Also taking into consideration these scores, they adjust by benchmark window. So the score that was needed to achieve in spring 2022 might not be the same as it is to achieve now. They adjust that with each window as well. Okay, here we have some math proficiency. Again, we're broken into two categories again, because of the same reason as previously. K and 1 actually take different assessments. You can see that at our K1 level, if you add those two bar graphs together, that is 72% of our district is at proficient. Our goal is to achieve to 80% proficiency in a system. We're making some fantastic headway here, and our teachers, even at the secondary level, are reporting higher level of skills in our math proficiency in the students that they're seeing coming in as well. So that's exciting to report, and just some anecdotal data there for you as well. Here you can see some marked increases too for longitudinal data by grade. And this one's been a little bit more scattered. I don't know why that might be, but you can see that we're definitely trending upwards there too.
What's the one color that's going down?
The 2027 graduating class, that is the current 8th grade. So you have to think of that as a big transition from 7th grade to 8th grade. And then also remembering they're assessing different things at different, like they might not be asked the exact same things. I noticed that too, no. Okay, so some conclusions here. We have some trends upwards in our longitudinal data. We're seeing increases in efficiency in both subjects. When we look back to last fall at this time, we did see some improvements in our proficiency rates, and we did not see a summer slide like we had previously, perhaps. I mean, you can make a conjecture that that might be the reason why. We continue to get clearer on our data use and adjusting our instruction, both at the individual classroom level, but also our teachers working in partners at a school or in teams across a grade level as well. And then there's also a team effort in planning for all students in the universal classroom, and also for some small group instruction to help skill build when needed. So I'm going to take a pause there for any wonders or follow-up questions that you might have before we transition to the building level data. Okay, next up we're going to focus on the secondary schools. So, Clint, do you want me to click for you, or do you want to click?
Sure, you can
Okay.
click through it. Again, I just want to remind you that when you look at those numbers up there, they're not percentages, they're the actual number of students that fell into those categories. So that green and the blue on the right is the low risk and college pathways. So we really, that's where we want our students to be falling. And then the red is the high risk, and that yellow color is the some risk, yes. So we want more in the red or more in the green and blue than we have in the red and yellow. And while we have seen some increases in proficiency, it's still not where we want to get to. We still have a high number in some grade levels more than others of students in that red category, and that's really what we want to try to focus on. This is our A math, and again, those same numbers apply. We've got some better looking numbers coming up, and also, if you remembered last year, we had from FastBridge test to FastBridge test, we had a better growth at the high school in math than we did in ELA, which is part of the reason why we are focusing specifically on literacy as a school this year. So when you go into some of the celebrations, one of the celebrations is that we have a greater number of students tested this year than ever before, a higher percentage in each of our grade levels. Now, that is important so that we can make sure that we have accurate data coming up, which leads into our teachers looking at that data and making some comparisons to the in-class assessments, and then they're having some discussions around grading in terms of what are we actually measuring with our grading, and is it matching up with those same things that we're seeing in the FastBridge assessments. And also, like Amy said, we have a stabilizing of data in the fall here, and that is a celebration that we didn't see that slide in the summer, and we're seeing that slight increase in proficiency. So it's either stabilizing or a slight increase when you look through that data.
Can you talk about the second point a little bit more? I guess I'm slightly unclear.
Yep. So if we're I'll use algebra for example. If we're looking at our tests from chapter to chapter, and we're looking at the standards that we addressed in that chapter, and maybe our kids are scoring really well on those standards. What does the FastBridge say that that group of kids is scoring well at or not scoring well at? And then how are we comparing those? So if we're looking at our in-class assessments compared to our FastBridge, like, are we teaching the things that FastBridge is testing on, or are we teaching the things that our standards, our resource is emphasizing? Because we as the educators have to do that dance, so to speak, in terms of making sure that we're using a resource as a resource, not as just this is what we walk through, because that's what is laid out for us, but we have to be continuously comparing to our standards and assessments that are measuring those standards. I don't know if that makes sense. So
you have to properly teach the test.
Well, we have to make sure that we're teaching what we're being tested on.
Which is aligned to the standards.
Yeah, we have to make sure it's aligned with the standards. There you go.
How similar is the FastBridge standard to the state standard? Are they sort of similar, or since FastBridge National, is it really far away? Or is that hard?
I wouldn't say far away, but the nuances we find are sometimes in the vocabulary that we might use. I think I might have mentioned that last. I know you might use different terminology, which will confuse students if you're using not the same words. But really, it's important to have all three levels of assessments, where you have in-classroom assessments, these benchmarks, and then the higher level, and you have to look for that alignment piece. And that's really an art of going between forward exam, what they might expect, this, what they might expect, because you can have three different types of vocabulary going on between three different assessments. So it's really giving students a broad understanding of some of those key areas. I can't say that we've done a fantastic job of making a lot of those comparisons yet, but especially with like forward exam and ACT, because that can get very complex. We've been working harder on our in-home things, our alignment to FastBridge, and also with our standards, but that's another level that we need to work through as well.
So having that discussion, Jill, about what we're emphasizing in our resource based on what is being tested on the FastBridge and our ACT Aspire, is a discussion that our teachers engage in.
So you want your resource to reflect what's being tested, right?
Yes, but just because your resource has everything laid out, doesn't mean you can't emphasize a certain standard more or less depending on what value is being put on that standard as far as the test.
Okay. Thank you.
It's actually, you can't decide if that's hard or if that's annoying or if that's a lot of leeway for the teacher. To have sort of different, like you're saying, a little different thing on the ACT that you could teach to if you wanted to make sure your score was good versus this or versus, I don't know, whatever.
Like Amy said, when you look at that
You guys have 10 minutes till the time starts. Start cleaning up.
Like Amy said, when you're looking at that vocabulary, that's kind of a big deal. So if ACT or FastBridge says it one way, and I mean, she used the example of takeaway and subtraction before, and your resource indicates that same operation as a different way, you've got to have those discussions in terms of how are we going to clarify this for students.
I had somebody tell me last year that their kid did bad on the math test because in school they did top and the bottom, the adding and subtracting. On the test it was this way.
That's possible.
So it was a lot harder for them. I can't remember if that was a first grader or something, but
It seems like it's a lot of time on administration and staff to go about this. It'd be nice if your staff could just focus on teaching the content and looking at individual results and then meeting those needs, but it seems like it's out of your control. It seems like there's a lot of time spent on looking at data and preparing for testing the test well.
But FastBridge we do because we want to, right? Just to
It's our
push to
only-
be better. We don't have to be, we don't have to teach that test necessarily.
You have to have a benchmarking test as a school. So we would have to have something. So whether it's FastBridge, STAR, MAPS, you can have any number of. But as far as what you're speaking to, is it that we spend a lot of time planning for a forward exam? I say we spend some time familiarizing with the platform and the testing format, but
Some practicing.
it's not to the degree that maybe you're thinking. I guess I'm not quite sure exactly what you're thinking it might be, but there's much more time spent with in class, what we're doing here to respond to student needs and student data, real-time data.
I just checked because I was looking for that connection and I couldn't remember it off the top of my head. So FastBridge has conducted these meta-analyses so that it is able to confirm scores are measures, they're predictive measures of how students at that level will perform on the state assessment in that area. So they're not tightly correlated to the standards, but yet they take, like you're saying, those core concepts, if you will, and breaking them into these 4 categories. So we don't start standardized testing until 3rd grade anyway. So really for our K through 2, it's a predictor that could change, but more tightly aligned in 3 through 11. I don't know if that helps, but.
I have had conversations about the vocabulary with staff, I think primarily at the middle school, just in, I don't know, what started the conversations, but the vocabulary is really significant. I didn't even know what it was referring to at a middle school level, so yeah, it's really interesting.
And, well, I guess I'll address that when I get there. But a couple of things that we're continuing to work on, this, as you know, is our first year with a new ELA resource, 812. And that's another reason we want to focus on literacy. We want to get that consistency and boost up our growth in that, and we're hopeful that that new resource is going to help us get some continuity in those classes.
Was that something, did we have a FastBridge type thing when we were in high school, whenever that was, 2004? Was that not, did we just, I remember the ACT and the SAT, but we didn't actually do these tests, did we? So it's a relatively
New
newish.
as a comparison to you or I.
Yeah, okay. I just thought maybe I remember it. Okay, that's it.
And honestly, I think it's a result of the higher stakes testing. You know, not everyone had to take the ACT back in the day, et cetera, but as those stakes grow, including unfairly, or that's not the intention, but ranking districts across the state, and that's significant. So I think now people are trying to arm districts with information and preparation for the scores.
As I mentioned, our math has shown more growth, but it's still not where we want it. These other proficiency measures that I mentioned before, so we want to continue that growth.
5 minutes.
Clint, why'd you pick the numbers instead of the percents?
That's the way we represent our data across. I mean, when you see the other presentations, you'll see the numbers as well.
Oh, okay.
It just gives you some, Amy did percentages district-wide, and we dug into the numbers to give you a kind of put a name with a face type of thing instead of just a percentage.
Also, when we get to the elementary, we did combined elementary, so like 25% of students at West might not be the same as 25% of students at North, and so it was easier to compute numbers, but.
And also, you know, you've heard of professional learning communities in the past, but our PLCs are continually reviewing that data and adjusting based on research-based practices, which we're continuing to learn about as a staff. And I did want to also mention our school conditions goal is in here as well, although you don't see that in the math and ELA data, but that is something we're also focusing on with staff and students to create that sense of belonging. Questions for the high school?
Okay, Heather with the middle school.
All right, here's our A reading. So 3rd grade coming into 4th grade. And we've seen quite a bit of growth within that, our A reading and our A math, so we're happy with that. We obviously are not happy with the numbers that are red, so we're going to continually work on decreasing that. So our goal right now is to really focus on that targeting of each group. And then with A math, you can see our 3rd graders that came in to us as 4th grade, they have, and that you saw that last year with our elementary when they were sharing all their data. So not much of a summer slide, I don't think, coming in here with us. So we were just really happy to see that. And then on our next slide, we're going to go through some of the celebrations and so on and so forth. So what we did with 4th and 5th grade math is we took the information from our elementary, and with the ability to have the Math Institute, Paige Richards, work with, we have 2 lead teachers, Julie DeWinska at 4th grade and Tom Beatty, 5th grade. They are not in an instructional coaching position. They are teaching, and they're also getting additional, we have Paige come in like 1 time a month and work with them for a full day to work on strategies, and then they're building up to go back to the teachers, to meet with them. Along with that, I feel is important is this is our first that we're doing full partner teaching in 4th and 5th grade. So what that is going to mean is if I'm teaching the ELA aspect.
You have 2 minutes. You have to be out of your hallway or you're going to lose points.
That's Mrs. Kilcheski. I feel like I'm watching which show?
Yeah, like
what are those?
Yeah,
Grease or something? So if I'm teaching ELA, I have the word work, the writing, and the reading aspect, and then Jill would be my partner teacher, and she's teaching the math, science, and social studies. So we contemplated about doing that. We just really felt like our teachers at 4th and 5th grade were just really struggling with teaching all of the content, and with our scores, we thought, let's give it a try. So they've been doing a lot of work on that, so I want to point that out because I didn't list it. So far, they're really happy. We know that we lose some time with transitions, but we're getting better with that, and I see our teachers and our students being much more intentional with those transitions. Dreambox was a resource that was used at elementary. Rachel and the elementary team helped us out with that information, because after seeing their data, I was like, what are you guys doing and what can we do differently? So we have implemented that. We have it purchased. Our tech team helped purchase Dreambox for our 4th through 7th grade. Along with that implementation, Renee Smith at the elementary level, and a lot of other teachers and instructional coaches have been helping us make sure that we've been using this. We did a pilot at the end of the year, and now we're full 4th through 7th grade. Every PD day from the beginning of the year through October 28th, we're spending 1 hour with Dreambox to help us understand how to look at the data and how to help our students persevere through.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 8 o'clock.
All right.
That's all.
So that should be the rest of the PA. So that has been really important to not just give these teachers this resource, but then to also follow up and give them some time to dabble in with it. Go, oh, we had some really great conversation on Friday, and they left there going back to their classrooms today. A lot about goal setting. It's not just about putting this Chromebook in front of the students and here's the resource, get after it. The teachers were talking about noticing the struggle that the students are having when they get to certain points in the Dreambox resource with the math, focusing on the skills and how do you get students to buy into the goal setting and sit down and teach with that. So we know that goal setting is a huge part. So I'm just very excited with our math. We've really stepped up our game and really happy that our elementary has shared the information with us. And then higher student numbers, we did notice that all the way through in each of those categories, A reading and A math. We're getting more students into the low risk level. Our staff are continually reviewing data to support student learning and adjust their teaching strategies. And I know data is a lot, just trust us, we're all working together.
Ms. Newfelt, please come down to the common.
We're always working together with data, but we don't, that's not the only thing too. We get that, but we have to believe in what the data is telling us to help us drive our decisions. And that's not something that is an easy task for many of us because we haven't used it a whole lot. So. Our continued efforts, definitely small group instruction, student supports. We have students that are getting push-in support and some students that are still coming out occasionally depending upon what's going on. It could be through behavior or through academic. But we feel like we have a pretty good flow this year. We have a lot of good support set up and our teachers are, and all of our IA staff, they're just really trying to adjust each day. There's continual conversations. Do you need me in here today? Oh, it doesn't look like I need to be needed here today. I'm going to go this 15 minutes or this hour and help another student. So I'm very pleased with that. We are reviewing ELA resources. Amy's helping lead ELA Vision. We just had a meeting again on Friday. I think the team was excited to hear that they are a part of what a new resource potentially might look like. So that's good, and I know that that's continually moving ahead. We also had a math vision, which is kind of one step behind the ELA process, but all of our teachers are happy to be a part, but they're not forced to continue to delve into all the resources. They'll be able to make that decision if they want to be a part of that team that does spend a little bit more time. So that's a good 2 processes in our district. Obviously our PLC data we talked about. We also have sense of belonging as a school condition, and I believe that falls into our district as well. And our 7 mindsets have been going over really well. We're hoping that we start seeing some of those correlations. We definitely have students that still do not feel a part of school or don't feel like they want to be there. We know that. So we're continually working through that in every aspect of our academic as well as throughout the day. And then teamwork, I just can't be any happier with our grade levels, with our horizontal and vertical conversations. To have 4th through 7th grade math teachers in a meeting from 11:30 to 12:30, and they're all engaged and they're talking, and being able to call them a math team, that was exciting. We haven't been able to do that, so I'm very, very pleased. So I want to thank all of you guys for helping us make that way into our journey. So that's my shout out.
Nice. Announcements. Only 6 announcements.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll now shift to elementary academic updates.
Okay, so as you are probably familiar, we at the elementary level receive achievement gap reduction funding, and there's expectations that we update the board on our progress, student progress. So we have this meeting, we'll have our winter update and then a spring update on how students are performing. And that funding helps us to initiate either one of the 3 or more than one of the 3 strategies there: one-on-one tutoring, instructional coaching or maintaining a class size 18:1. So we have been using both internal and external coaching supports over the past several years, and also using that funding for maintaining that class size, reasonable class size. This data is similar to the previous slide with the student demographics. You see the number of students per class, per grade level, I should say. And then on the second half of the slide, there's not much difference at the elementary level between male and female. There is about a 2% more students with disabilities at the elementary level. I think the district is around 16%. And there's about a 10% increase in economically disadvantaged students compared to the overall district percentages. EL is about the same. And then the last data point there is students of color. We're just noticing more diversity in our schools and our classrooms. That the community is changing. You probably noticed that also. So just an update on our demographics.
All right, so the next slide is our reading proficiency data from our fall benchmark screener. As was noted, our Can 1 do take that early reading assessment, and then our second and third grade do take that A reading assessment. As you'll notice, we do notice some trends with our first grade data this year. One thing that we account to some of that is there was a change in the testing. So the first grade students are now assessed on nonsense words instead of decodable words. So that may have affected our data for the fall at that first grade level. Our kindergarten last year as well did come in quite strong in the fall. So we are pleased to see that. Some of our response to our reading data, last year we contracted to get additional training in FastBridge, and so it's called Fast for Success. All of our staff at the elementary level are receiving some training in it, and then our principals, title teachers, interventionists also are participating in a train the trainer on facilitating the data meetings and really looking deeper into the data. And just recently, our most recent data meeting really focused on our screening to intervention reports. So the Fast for Success training has provided our staff, including myself and principals, with more understanding on really what the data is showing us and how to respond to the data. And then, as I mentioned, our title and interventionists are helping to lead those data meeting discussions. And then, obviously, our title teachers and interventionists are helping to support through small group instruction.
Can I just add a little bit to that?
Yeah.
So, Jill, you were asking about the time that goes into testing and all this, and really, as we learn more about FastBridge, we're learning more. Maybe you've heard the phrase data-rich, information-poor. We're really trying to take a look at what FastBridge is telling us about our learners and how our classroom teachers may need to respond. And respond is with either like this last activity, there was a point where if you had so many students below a certain level, you need to maybe look at what's happening at the universal level. What's happening in your normal day-to-day instruction that can be changed. And obviously we're going to be doing support for kids in small group, but is there something in the data that's showing universally we need to make an adjustment? So teachers are collaborating and talking about that. So we're trying to use this data to really drive instruction.
And I'll add to that, so the screening to intervention report does break down in 4 different pillars, and it identifies what our area of need is. So as Tom mentioned, it identifies what your, if there's a core intervention that's needed, and at North, and I think across the elementary, there is a core intervention needed at every grade level. So what Tom mentioned is that we need to do something as a tier 1 universally at every grade level right now because they're missing, whether it's phonemic awareness, phonics, and then the next pillars are like fluency and comprehension. And so most of our interventions that are stating for the core intervention that's needed is at that phonemic awareness level. So what the screening to intervention report provides is it provides us with, here's what your core intervention is, this 10 to 15 minute intervention that should be provided to your entire class to best support as there's obviously a gap in somewhere.
So theoretically, nonsense words are decodable, right? They're just not
Yes,
words
they're
you've
just-
seen before.
Yeah, and so that just may have tripped up some students, like, because it doesn't make sense.
They're like, that's not a word.
Yeah.
So we just
So they
wanted to
question themselves sometimes.
make sure they weren't just screening for meaning, but actually knowing what sounds made together.
So our math data, as we saw last year too, there wasn't evident growth in our math data last year. Obviously, this is just our fall benchmark data. We do attribute some of our math success to the supports we have put in place that Heather accounted for, which is our support through professional development and coaching from the Math Institute of Wisconsin, alongside our support teachers. So at each building, we do have a math support teacher. At North and East, that support teacher does support in both literacy and math. So it's not a full-time person. And that staff member does do some coaching with helping to coach teachers, provide them some interventions or model for the teacher as well. And we have recently purchased some fluency kits. So we had some professional development on those from our math support teachers. And then our math support teachers are going into the classroom and modeling number strings, or we'll be moving on to math talks to, again, provide more of those math practices to help support our students.
What's a math fluency? What's a number string?
So a number string, so it will, let's see, I wish I could just bring one of the, it's like a visual. So it would start with a visual and would have like a base 10 or 10 block. So there would be 5 dots, and we would kind of talk through how many is this, and like also talking through, okay, how, if you have this 5 and this 3, you know, and really talking through the number string as to visually how can we combine. If we have 5 and 8, we can make a 10, or we can make 2 5s. It's really looking at and working through the numbers or even the visual to build that understanding of math. And then we'll get to the math talks, which some people call them number talks. And again, it's on understanding the math practices and really talking through what does it mean. Some of the other supports, as I mentioned, we do, or as Heather mentioned, we also are continuing to work and utilize a Dreambox resource, which is a computer-based program, and it is kind of game-based, and it helps provide some additional math support and lessons, but students are highly engaged during it. And we set a goal that we want students to complete 5 lessons in a week. Some classrooms are able to do more than that, some students, and the evidence does show that if on average they can complete those 5 lessons a week, it also does increase their achievement.
Computerized lessons?
Yes, it's a computer program, kind of like Headsprout, or like for reading we have Headsprout. And it's not just on fact fluency, it's also on the math practices.
So obviously you heard a lot about some of the celebrations that we have. Partnering with the Math Institute has continued to be a source of success for us, and the professional development that our math support teachers are able to provide our elementary staff has been wildly successful and really appreciated by all of our teachers. Dreambox continues to help us fill in some of those gaps. You can assign standards that students are missing and to see where they're at as far as progressing through grade levels. Our K-2 staff, title staff, SPED staff, coaches and principals have all attended the foundational literacy training with Amy McGovern of CSID 9. We're super proud to say that. And then a lot of our title and SPEDs and coaches have been attending the reading mastery training, which is an intervention that we purchased in order to meet the needs of our youngest learners with that phonemic and phonological awareness deficits. We still have those data discussions, like Don was saying, to drive our instruction, and they get richer and deeper each time we go through this process. So some of our continued efforts, obviously we want to focus on practices and strategies for math and reading. We have really found that by focusing on those, our math has gone up, regardless of what the resource we're using. And we're finding that really the same thing with reading, with our learning that we've done through the foundational literacy training and with the Fast for Success. So we have PLCs, we have learning design teams that are continuing to look at the standards and then design learning to meet the needs of our students. We are targeting skills with our teams at every grade level. We're just dabbling into EduClimber, which you all had approved a purchase of in the spring. It's an awesome, amazing data warehouse, and we hope to showcase it to you in the spring when we bring our data forth. It is going to be really helpful to take a snapshot of really a student's data across their attendance, their any type of behavior assessments we're doing, interventions, and academic, historical at a click of our fingertips. Fast for Success, we're just beginning that at the elementary level. Our teachers are learning about some professional development around the area of the science of reading. I think it's really important to know that when we got FastBridge initially, we got it because we had to have a screener. You heard Amy say that we have to screen our students 3 times a year, and this was one of the ones that was making the rounds, so to say. I had used NWA MAP at my previous district. It took a very, very long time to assess, and FastBridge is much quicker, but we didn't know initially that it was based in the science of reading. And so our first couple years with it, we were just baffled at why are we improving, what is going on? And now that we know a little bit more about that and are doing some deeper dives with the Fast for Success, we're really fully understanding what our data is meaning. And that's been really impactful for our teachers. And we are going to continue to prioritize that funding for staffing. Unfortunately, we were not able to fill all of the 1-2 support teachers that you all approved in the spring, but we're hoping that we can maybe hire someone at semester and or in the spring to continue to assess. We know especially that grade 2 still needs additional support. So we're still hoping to hire those positions in the future. Any questions on the elementary?
I think every year during this presentation, I wonder how teachers are supposed to know if it's a lack of phonics skills or a lack of phonological awareness. Because do they not know they're supposed to blend at all, or do they not know the sounds, or do they, how does the program identify that?
It does. And like right now when we looked at some of our data, I had my universal screen data meetings today. It'll say which ones really need the help with hearing the sound. Can they even hear the first sound of the word? Can they blend the sounds together? Can they segment them apart? Or is it more like a letter sound knowledge? You need to know that that letter that you see right there makes that sound. So our teachers are really starting to understand the strong differences.
Okay, so you can see if 10 kids all miss the same sound or some of them miss.
At the K-1 level you can, fortunately, because the assessments are given individually to the students. When you get up into 2 through 12, it's a computerized assessment, but the A reading will give you a clue if there's a phonemic awareness or a phonological awareness issue. It will tell you that on the screening intervention report.
Rachel, you said something that really resonated with me, and that was about the resource, that teachers were making gains in strategies and best instructional practices regardless of resource. Because we all crave, as do parents, right, of students who struggle, we all crave like an easy fix. If you just do this, it'll work for everybody, and it doesn't exist. And as a teacher, it can feel so overwhelming because every learner can be so different. So I'm really happy to hear that their confidence is starting to grow as well.
And I think it's helped that we developed those essential standards
right.
in math and LA, so they know, like, these are the things that these students have to know, and what does it look like in a success criteria for them to know that standard, and then what lessons or resources or, you know, tools do we need to pull for the learners that are in front of us so they understand that standard.
How do we support students that don't achieve the identified standard at their grade level? Like, maybe the elementary is probably different than the middle school than the high school, but I guess to frame my question better, had questions and feedback regarding, do we pass students even if they don't pass the course, say math? Do we pass them to the next grade level? If not, what's provided or offered? If they are offered summer school credit recovery but don't complete it, then what? You know, so essentially when they get to be junior, senior year, the credit, and maybe this is, I don't know if it's focused on you or Amy, but credit deficient students, then what? What are we doing to help support them or if they don't pass required courses to achieve the credits?
So I can take a step at it first. So just talking about like the benchmark assessment, when we have students in the red, we're going to progress monitor all of those students in the red. So like for ELA, any students at North that have been identified in that 0 to 19th percentile, each of those students are being progress monitored weekly using FastBridge. It could be on letter names and sounds. It really is dependent on what their area of concern is. And then we also at the elementary utilize the support not only from our title teachers and interventionists, but also small group instruction within the classroom during our win time and even our reading block to really provide students with the support that they need in the area that they need. So using the data, like we have utilized our data meetings and then our screening to intervention reports to not only provide that universal whole class intervention, but also now digging deeper into what is this individual student or this group of students, where are they lacking, and what supports do they need. So that's really the first part. And then obviously there's further discussion if they're continuing not to make progress, we have to start with that intervention and what we can provide for support before we can say that they're not passing.
And the research on retention is pretty clear that it doesn't change anything. The exception would be 4K is optional, right? It's not mandatory. So we have had some 4K parents and teachers discuss with the principal, you know, young 4K, just getting the hang of this, we'd like that child to repeat, or our child to repeat 4K. High school then is a whole different ballgame because of the credits. So, and we can't assume that the credit deficiency is automatically related to lack of academic capability, because it isn't. We stand a better chance if they're fully engaged, which is why we work so hard on that. And one thing you just read in We Can Review, our WINGS program, that engagement, we're really hoping that if those students feel engaged, perhaps some for the first time, that their credit achievement will grow as well. So.
And anytime it's been brought to me in question, it's been more at the high school level, I think, and as maybe I was directing my summarizing in terms of credit recovery, but Donna, I appreciate your feedback because I don't know if I've thought about it from an elementary level perspective. And so you identify by progress, you know, the data collected and progress monitoring and interventions provided to a student or students. Have we had it where at the end of the year then, a student or more than one student haven't met that benchmark? I don't want to say in comparison to their peers, but I'll say it for simplicity of if they aren't at where the average is for their class, do they move on to the next level? Or like
they do. Sorry for interrupting. So I was just going to say that we also, after those interventions, we use our support system. So our support system, you know, which you have probably seen, it focuses on both academics and behavior. So students have concern regarding academics or behavior. So we have a universal level, and then like if they're receiving title intervention or small group intervention, then that would be like our tier 2. And we track that data, and then those students could come to SST, so student study team meetings, if those students are continuing to not show academic progress. Then a student could then receive a referral for special education if through our process we're like, okay, we're trying this intervention, this is not working. We're trying this intervention after this amount of time. We're progress monitoring. We're looking at our data. Like, we obviously want to make sure that we're looking at all of the data, and we don't want students to have to go to referral, but there also could be at the elementary age more students at the elementary rather than as you get up higher. There could be an area of disability as well. So we want to really get all of the information. Students could go to referral where we get some additional testing to determine. Obviously we want to provide interventions. If an intervention is working, we wouldn't go to a referral. Our hope is that some type of intervention or switch intervention, whether it's the resource, the amount of time, the amount of students in that group. Now maybe they're in a one-on-one intervention to really try and best support the student. Then your next question was, could a student then be retained? And they could be, you know, we don't retain that many, even at the elementary. I would say more would be not even retained, because it's not called retained at 4K, but they may repeat 4K as it's not required. And we have had a few, very limited amount, that have been retained at the elementary. But again, I guess statistics and data does show that retaining doesn't always, you know, provide the solution, especially if it's a student who we may be looking at going to referral, because you do want to keep them with their same age peers, rather than now hold them back, now they're not compared to their same age peers.
Thank you.
I think it's interesting. So when I was just trying to Google that while we were sitting here, Mississippi, Florida, and Michigan, if you don't pass a 3rd grade reading test, you get held back automatically. So they were just saying they suspended it during the pandemic because they thought kids struggled so much. But, you know, it's just a very weird, you know, it's a difference. You remember when we were in high school, the state talked about having a state graduation test. Mm-hmm. I was nervous, everybody was nervous. You know, that would be like, you can't graduate if you don't pass this test. It's like I assume that would get people to try much harder than saying, oh, you gotta take the ACT. You know, that would be a real, I don't know, stick. That's the word. But like you say, John Hattie always says retention doesn't work. It's the lowest meta-analysis in his book, right?
Right, and we were just always thinking, you know, what will be different? So let's pick 3rd grade. If everyone's on board that this child repeats 3rd grade, why would he be successful the next time around? What are we going to do differently? Because he'll present the same. He's a kid. What will we change that better sets him up for success?
Well, you'd ask that same question to send him on 4th grade though, too.
Right, any grade. Really.
So, yeah.
So you'd say, we really got to hit his phonics better somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's doing it again in 3rd grade or no, or trying to do it all in a small group.
Yeah, so when Donna, you know, talks about we try to intervene and find what works, that's why Heidi is so passionate, and as is the state, about over-identifying in special ed. Because it used to be you request a referral and then we could kind of mold things and make sure that child qualified. It isn't like that anymore. It's very structured and systematic, where all criteria have to be met in order for a child to qualify. And that's kind of like the last, not last, but it's a really important intervention that we can make, is to offer a child, and a parent doesn't have to accept it, but offer an individualized plan. And then retention, you know, is off the table.
And I'm not even going through IEPs or not enough, or we should have more referrals or anything like that, but I appreciate that feedback.
And as far as at the high school, you know, you said, we offer different credit recovery options. Yeah, there's summer credit recovery, students are taking credit recovery during the day. So one of their hours might be a credit recovery class credits from the previous year. We have student support team meetings at the high school as well, along with labs, which are attended by teachers in the IMC, helping out students in certain subject areas, and along with in-class interventions, such as more often conferring with students, including them in different smaller strategy groups that we're running. So it's a myriad of different options for them.
I would like to add to Matt Murad how town was summer school this year, and it was exciting to hear, and I haven't seen the official data on it yet, but students, let's say, who failed a semester course or a year of math, that instead of having to repeat that whole year, what standards are they missing? And then can they remediate in those standards and have them test out? And that was a summer school.
Instead of repeating the whole course.
And
You have to test out each chapter yet though, correct?
Right, but if I really struggled in X, Y, or Z in the course, and I failed the standards in those chapters, but I did okay on the other ones, but these are what brought me down because I didn't get it at all, then I'm going to redo those specifics.
If their final grade was above a 40% or something like that.
Yes.
So that was a
Yes.
caveat,
Yep.
okay.
so that's something we'd like to explore more. Clint knows I'm on a mission to reduce the number of students who have to retake full courses at the high school. It's very expensive, and we don't always have the success we want to see, even a second time around. So I'd like to grow that summer motions and help kids stay on track.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. If you repeat a course that was difficult and it becomes difficult, you can return to your pattern of behavior, coping skills or avoidance or whatever, and then that second repeat is the same outcome.
And I just wanted to add and make sure that I'm clear that I didn't mean like we would do these interventions if they're not working, then we always go to referral. Like there's so many other things that we try and do, including really looking at attendance. Because even if we were to go to a special education referral, attendance is a exclusionary factor or something. So like if a student's really struggling attending school, they've missed the instruction. So it's not necessarily that, we can't even say that they have a disability or they don't have a disability because they missed the instruction. So we really work on building that sense of belonging and making sure that they're feeling safe, that they're coming to school, whether it's doing a check and connect with a teacher so that they also feel like there's someone that cares about them, that can check on them, set goals with them. So there's so many extra parts before we're to get to a special education referral. And we utilize that student support system and those SSTs, those student study teams, to really work through and support a student as a team.
And to be fair, anytime it's come to me, questions similar to this, it's not that there should be a referral for an IP. So that's not like the desired outcome or the context of the question either. And I appreciate that. It's an important part of the conversation and what we provide, but just so that it's fair to you guys, that wasn't like an end goal or a concern.
Do you have people saying, I wish we'd hold more kids back? Or is that just, were you just thinking about it in general?
Feedback has been consistent in that capacity of struggles by passing along because they didn't meet standards or that of their same age peers, but continue to stay in their classroom and go to the next level, but aren't gaining the skills to achieve at the next level.
From parents or from teachers? Both.
That's been brought up to me.
Yeah, I mean, I never talked to
think
anybody, so I
variety.
don't know.
But again, that goes back to, and Heidi will say this routinely, an IEP is going to solve a problem, right? So that goes back to understanding the process and what's available in the interventions too, and just opening the communication.
And I guess another point that I would make too is that obviously we would want to keep students that we think could potentially be identified as a student with a learning disability with their same age peers, but then also a student with an IEP. So say someone who has already been identified with an IEP and they are performing well below their grade level, like we wouldn't want to retain them because students with an IEP have up until the age of 21 to be able to graduate as well. So we definitely wouldn't retain a student with an IEP, and that's also why we really take into consideration, in addition to social and emotional factors that would play into, you know, having a student retained as well. But if, you know, we want to make sure we're looking into everything else before we were to look at retention.
Thank you.
When we were talking about programs earlier, I remember when we first got Lucy Calkins, there was a lot of talk about we're going to have big silent reading blocks. Did we kind of give up on that? It always seemed funny, like how are these second or first graders supposed to read for 30 minutes silently and they can't read one page by themselves? And I don't know, I tried to read with my kid and, you know, we're sounding words out. And I can't imagine him, well, he did. He just showed me how he read a Bernsey Bear book by himself. Like, he can tell the story with the pictures, but that's not a, but do we still do that, or is that like our teachers going to just work with small groups during the rest of that, or is that?
So, Rachel, otherwise I'll keep talking. So we do still have read to self time. However, we do try and build up their stamina, and we also know that at some grade levels it may not be efficient use of time. So we may provide other, maybe the screening to intervention, this core intervention, it could be utilized during that time.
But so during first grade, is there much large blocks of silent reading time, or not?
There's
really?
not the 45 minutes or 30 minutes, no. There's,
And teachers work with small groups at that time too, don't they?
Yes. During the second, so after the universal lesson is provided, they utilize the rest of the reading block to have small group support as well. So some students may be reading to self, while some students are in a small group. Or some students may be utilizing the Head Start resource or something else as well.
We've kind of used, our principals have been very good at utilizing the resources in their building to target certain groups that need additional supports too. So at certain levels, they have maybe another adult in the room too, like a title teacher that might help with a group, or different types of ways to provide needed instruction for all the students too. So they've been very creative in using their personnel, as well as how they structure that time to make sure we're meeting all the needs of students.
Anything else, Amy?
That's it.
Okay. Any other questions? Me and you. Do you have any other questions? No. Okay. Okay. So then, agenda item C, biannual budget discussion, was covered in the finance committee. So we don't need anything on that, correct, Danny? Okay. Motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion. I'm the only one left. You can't make it yourself.
Can I second it?
I'll second.
Okay. Okay. Next curriculum meeting is Monday, November 7th.